Playing Frogs Hypothesis 20.
Welcome students. In this video I will be analyzing the essay that we have studied together with you. So let's begin. In order to analyze the essay that was written by Gramsci, we first need to understand that the development of whatever concepts that he discovered or he was formulating, that was a direct result of the Italian Renaissance. So there are many possible explanations that emerged that try to analyze or try to justify or try to understand, to study, to criticize the entire history of or the entire social change that reflected from the Italian Renaissance. Some have seen or given ideas that were independent of the society of at that point of time. Some view the ideas as passive reflections. Some would reflect that the ideas that were produced as a result of the Italian Renaissance, they were passive reflections of economic and political events, or they were expressions of social and economic interests. Most would agree, however, that the situation was more complicated, that ideas generated within social frameworks, within the framework of the society, and that intellectual activity is active rather than passive. Intellectual activity is not passive but active, and it helps to move history. And Antonio Gramsci, the philosopher, journalist, he was a linguist, a co-founder of the Italian Communist Party. He recently discovered and now his ideas, they were much in vogue. They are much more popular than they were when he first discovered them. Gramsci assigns a very unique and crucial role to the intellectuals in the process of the social change, and he finds in his own national tradition a resource, a source and standard, a level against which he would test his theories of cultural process. And thus he speaks not only of intellectuals but of Italian intellectuals and of intellectuals of the Renaissance, critical figures of Italy's past, who were loaded with the responsibility of the present, the responsibility of making the social change that would trickle down, that would continue into the present. Gramsci's theory of intellectual activity may help illuminate a period distinguished by its intense forms of intellectual life. Italian Renaissance, it produced a lot of intellectuals into the society, a lot of new ideas into the society, and Gramsci's theory helps us illuminate or throw light upon a period which is particularly distinguished by its intense forms of intellectual life. His analysis of the achievements and failures of Renaissance culture may give us the opportunity to see the neglected forms of inquiry, and it helps us contribute to a deeper understanding of that entire age. However, it is quite difficult to compress all of the ideas that Gramsci presented in his book, in his entire collection of the prison notebooks, and we have to keep in mind that this particular essay we are studying, it was not written as an isolated incident. It was not written separately, but it was a part of the entire world of ideas that he was producing, that he was discovering, that he was writing down, his entire concept of social change. So it is not really easy to isolate or to pick out only his concept of intellectuals and analyze them, because they are related to his complete philosophy, the philosophy of Gramsci. And it is risky because Gramsci himself warned against speculative philosophy, systematic or speculative philosophy, but he was saw as the unique merit. He spoke about the philosophy of praxis. He spoke about the philosophy of praxis. And the unique merit, the very unique advantage of philosophy of praxis was that it unfolded, or it unfolded, its meaning slowly emerged only in relation to the concrete events. So they were not speculative in nature. The philosophy was related to concrete events, and it was never separated from actual life, which is full of changes, which is very dynamic and not at all static. So his philosophy is all the more difficult to compress into a single analysis because of the sheer number of probabilities and possibilities that are explored in the philosophy of praxis. Philosophy of praxis meaning that it is undergoing right now, and something that undergoes or something that is carried out right now always involves changes, constant changes. The philosophy of praxis is a philosophy of the flux of life, the continuous changes that is incorporated within life. And therefore Gramsci's views are extremely distorted. They seem very here and there. They do not seem to be very a conglomerate of ideas. However, we will try to bring them together under a singular umbrella, and therefore make the analysis possible. And as such, we will be able to analyze the four most important points from within the essay. That is, the four problems that we need to deal with. That is the distinction between traditional and organic and traditional intellectuals, the organization of intellectual culture within a dominant social group, the organization of intellectual culture throughout the society as a whole. So first within a dominant social group, and then throughout the society as a whole, and finally the dynamics or the relationships involved within the intellectual culture, which is nothing but the process by which intellectual activity brings together economic change and political domination, which is essentially what Gramsci calls would lead to political hegemony. So let us first deal with the first problem, and we will try to analyze it through a diagram. And the diagram is because it will be easier to link all the four problems together with a common diagram as our base. So the concept which is fundamental to Gramsci's theory of intellectual activity and social process is the distinction between traditional and organic intellectuals. Traditional intellectuals include those persons, those people most of us would spontaneously consider to be intellectuals, most of whom would have no problem as asserting these people to be intellectuals, such as philosophers, artists, writers, perhaps teachers, religious leaders, and journalists. These intellectuals, they share a common language, the refined language of high culture, which they have acquired through through serious education, and a common heritage extending back to Plato. Philosophers have a common heritage which we can link, all of which can be linked back to Plato and beyond. And joined or together these rich cultural links, the traditional intellectuals, they tend to see themselves detached from the society. And we also see them to be detached from the society. And they are detached from all of the shifting currents of economic and political life. The traditional intellectuals are those who consider themselves, and all of the other people, they also consider them the traditional intellectuals, to be detached from society, from the shifting currents, from the flux of life, from the dynamic differences that exist within contemporary life, between the economic life, between the political life, that exist within the economic life, within the political life. They perceive, or they see themselves and are perceived and are seen as an independent social group, but they are not. If you remember, we had read this part together in the essay. So they consider themselves to be detached, but they are not so in reality. They too are possessed by history. They too have a role, or they do play a role in history. Generation after generation, they are absorbed, they are brought together into new social groups through the activity of the organic intellectuals of these groups, through the activity of the organic intellectuals of these groups. Now you would want to take notes from whatever I am saying, because you need to see the diagram in front of you as well. Yes, as I was saying, that you would need to take notes of whatever I am saying. All of what I am saying is actually important, and it's not possible to write all of what I am saying on the screen. I will write down the important points. Anyway, let's continue. So I was saying that these traditional intellectuals, who normally consider themselves to be detached from the society, they are absorbed into social groups, generations after generations, through the activity of the organic intellectuals. This is the basic difference between the two groups. Organic intellectuals are the members of each social group who, whatever their profession or economic role, create the ideas which rationalize and justify the interests of their own social group and its claim to dominance. And this is the basic difference, as I said, that the organic intellectuals, they create the ideas, they create their own ideas, revolutionary ideas, which justifies its own interests, which rationalizes, gives reason to its own interest. By its, I mean the dominant social group to which these organic intellectuals belong. They and they work to push forward the ideas of their own social group. Within the ruling class, they might include engineers, managers, bureaucrats. Within the proletariat, the trade union leaders. As each new social group comes to the forefront, forefront of history, in history, which in the diagram is represented by the vertical axis, the lines which are vertical, that is straight from bottom to top or top to bottom. So that is the diagrammatic, that is how the group is represented within the diagram. Each social group is represented within the social diagram in the vertical axis. In this diagram that you see in front of you, its organic intellectuals intersect. As you can see, the organic intellectuals are intersecting or joining the common line of the traditional intellectuals, the horizontal axis, which is the traditional intellectuals. The lines which are moving from bottom to up, they are the organic intellectuals, and they are intersecting the line of traditional intellectual, which is moving from left to right in the diagram. And as each new social group comes to the forefront in history, as I was saying, its organic intellectuals intersect, penetrate, or gets combined within the by the traditional intellectuals. It intersects the traditional intellectuals. The latter, that is the traditional intellectuals, whether because of their own social origin or of a more subtle form of linkage, that the fact that they are not intellectuals who are performing towards a social change consciously. So the latter, the traditional intellectuals, they are absorbed into one social group or another. So as you can see, with time, there are so many lines of organic intellectuals. As time moves from the line of time moves from left to right on the diagram, you see that there are many vertical lines that are produced. There are many, so as I said, that as history progresses, so does the categorizations of organic intellectuals. There are many various forms of organic intellectuals that are produced throughout the history. As a philosophy of praxis, that is how it will develop, something that changes constantly, and with the requirement of new ages, with the requirement of new populaces, of new populations, new types of organic intellectuals develop, new types of social groups develop who have their own distinct organic intellectuals working distinctly towards the progress, for the progress of that individual social group. However, the traditional intellectuals, they only have one line because they share a common heritage. The differences that I have written down for your benefit, because they comprise of a common circle. All of the world calls them intellectuals because of the common language of high culture that they share, the common heritage that they share. And throughout history, the lines within the diagram of organic intellectuals, they penetrate or they touch the line of the traditional intellectuals, which signifies that the traditional intellectuals are absorbed into one social group or the other, merging with its organic intellectuals who share the language and heritage, which are the particular property of the intellectual elite. The common tongue that the organic intellectuals and the traditional intellectuals share is the property of the intellectual elite. Even if the traditional intellectual continue to believe that they exist outside of the social processes, even if they continue to believe themselves to be detached, isolated from the social and economic life, and identify consciously only with their heritage in time, they have been expropriated. That is, expropriated is a very powerful term, which actually means expropriate actually means to deprive a person, for public use. It's a very a powerful and a very significant term that I am using, to deprive for public use. So as I was saying, that even if the traditional intellectuals, even if Plato or Nietzsche or even if T.S. Eliot, they considered themselves to be completely detached from the political and social life, and even if the world believes the same, they have been expropriated. They have been expropriated by the social process and have become absorbed into its structure. Through whom? Through none other than the organic intellectuals, through the mediation, through the manipulation, through the propagandist manipulation, or through the dodging or meandering of the organic intellectuals. The organic intellectuals, they expropriate the traditional intellectuals. Why and how? It depends upon which time of the history we are talking about. So if we are talking about, we are talking about the time when Greeks were in rule, when the time about which Shakespeare was writing. Suppose if I take the time period of Julius Caesar, if I am talking about the play itself, the traditional intellectual of Brutus, a novelty, and a social elite. He was a traditional intellectual who has the blood of royalty within him, even if it is not an aristocrat but the knightly class. So the class of Brutus, it was absorbed by the class of Cassius. Cassius, who rose to power out of his sheer propagandist mind, out of politics. So the organic intellectual of the time, that was Cassius, had absorbed the traditional intellectual, that was Brutus, into its own class in order to bring a social change through regicide, through killing of the king. Cassius had mediated within the society at that point of time, and he had brought about a social change, whichever he thought better, of course. And then the new generation, another social group, the sons of Caesar, they come and they try to topple the idea of Brutus, the idea of the class of Brutus that has already been absorbed by the organic intellectual of the working class or of the non-royal class of the Greek society at that point of time. And Caesar's son then would change it according to him. So this is what I am trying to say, that with time, with new social orders and new social groups, the traditional intellectuals, they are expropriated. They are basically, I do not want to use the word exploit, because that is a completely negative term, and the word exploitation would mean that the traditional intellectuals did not consciously surrender themselves to the other social group, which is not always the case. So expropriate is the correct term to deprive for public use because the organic intellectuals, they want to gain prominence, they want to come to power with its own social group as the ruling party. So this is how this is the basic difference that exists between these two groups, and it is through this process of fusion, it is through this process of fusing together of these two classes, that the conception of the concept of a given social group, of any social group, becomes or translates itself into the philosophy or art, and becomes the shared worldview of that segment of intellectuals to which it is wedded, to which it belongs. There is a very easy example that is ready in front of us. It is the very assignment that we have together. So the dominant social group of that point of time, that was revolutionary Marxism. The revolutionary Marxism in which Lenin sought to reorder the communist party of Russia at that point of time, and he wanted to bring about ideological changes within the economy, within the society. And so he deprives Antonio Gramsci, who is of course a traditional intellectual, meticulously educated. He belongs to that group of journalists. He was primarily a journalist, and it was his ideas that were absorbed by the revolutionary party of Lenin, So we have a ready example in front of us. Now we will move to the second problem that we have at hand, which I had written on the screen before. So what was that? So the second problem that we had at hand was the organization of intellectual culture within the dominant social group. So while it is the objective of every emerging social group to harness or to store, to use the energies of traditional intellectuals, that group which is dominant at any time in society fulfills this aim most successfully and it must do so. It must do so if it is to survive. The expropriation must exist at all forms, at all the time, if the dominant social group to which the organic intellectuals belong, if it has to survive. The intelligentsia that is formed by the fusion, by the combination of organic and traditional intellectuals within the given dominant social group, this intelligentsia defends that group's interest and expresses its worldview. And intellectuals therefore organize and enforce the authority of the group they represent. Of course, within the intelligentsia was a term that was most commonly used at Poland and Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution, and intelligentsia actually means the intellectual elite of a society. Of course, as I was saying, of course, within the intelligentsia that is cohesive, that is together as a unity, as a unit, that is unified together with the dominant social group, there will slowly form distinctions in quality of thought and creation. As I said, philosophy of praxis always takes into account the contemporary situations, which is nothing but a flux, which is nothing but a constant change. And so there will also arise within this within this intelligentsia distinctions in quality of thought and action, thought and creation. The spectrum of talent or the variety of talent may be pictured as a pyramid, which you can see in your on your screen. It may be pictured as a pyramid. The figure is actually Gramsci's. It was formed by Gramsci himself. At the base of this pyramid, we can see those intellectuals who are most closely related to the economic activity, characteristic of the social group in question, whichever social group. It may be the capitalistic social group, it may be the proletarian social group, the bourgeois social group. So whichever social group is dominant at that point of time, the base of the pyramid represents those intellectuals who are most closely related to the economic, to that economic activity which is characteristic of the social group that we have in question. And it is these intellectuals who perform routine types of intellectual work, managerial, administrative, such as. These are most appropriately defined. These activities, or the base of the pyramid, which you can see, they are most appropriately defined as the organic intellectuals. But within the intellectual elite, the organic intellectuals of the intelligentsia, the new fused group which has been formed when the organic intellectuals of the group absorbs the traditional intellectuals at any given point of time in history. The new group which is formed is the intelligentsia, and the base of the pyramid, the social relations, is represented by the picture which you see in front of you, and the base of this triangular picture, this base of the pyramid, actually represents the organic intellectuals within the intellectual elite, the organic intellectuals of the intelligentsia. So they perform the most routine tasks. They are the managers, they are the administrators, etc., etc. And at the peak of the pyramid, at the top of the pyramid, resides the single great thinker of the social group in question. The unique individual got expressed most concretely or most definedly, most coherently, the world conception of his social group. So it is that philosopher who best represents, whose works, whose philosophy, whose worldview best represents the worldview also, which is also of the dominant social group in question. He is an unique individual in whose work is expressed most significantly the world conception of his own social group. This figure, this great individual philosopher, will be one of the traditional intellectuals who adheres, who agrees to the characteristics of the dominant social group. Of course, through the mediation, through the meddling of the organic intellectuals, managed by the managers, which are the organic intellectuals, administered by the administrators, which are the organic intellectuals of the dominant social group. His relation, the figure at the top of the pyramid, his relation to the economic activity of that group is very remote. It's far away from the actual economic influence, from the concrete or economic or social influence. In between the base, which are the organic intellectuals of the intelligentsia, and the great individual philosopher who best represents the worldview of the dominant social group, who is also a traditional intellectual. In between the base and the peak of the pyramid exists the various strata within the intelligentsia. Toward the base, you can see increasingly organic in type and performing relatively routine intellectual work. Towards the peak, increasingly traditional in type and performing relatively refined intellectual work. The pyramid in its whole, in its entirety, it encompasses or including the range of intellectuals united to the dominant social group. This pyramid, inclusive of all of these variety of intellectuals which exist within a dominant social group, this pyramid constitutes the superstructure, which is actually, if you remember what I had taught you, the superstructure, which is the intellectual and artistic life, which is generated by the group's particular structure, which is the base, which is the organic intellectuals, the base which is inclusive of the organic intellectuals of the newly formed intelligentsia, which is again a fusion of organic and traditional intellectuals. So now you can see, as we move closer to deciphering the problems, we see why the organic intellectuals become one of the most important form of intellectuals that Gramsci speaks, that the proletariat must make or must create organic intellectuals, must retain organic intellectuals. The function of all the members of the intelligentsia to repeat is to organize and enforce the authority of the group it represents. And how does it do that? How does the intelligentsia or the function function to organize and enforce the authority of the group it represents? It does so in two areas: in the civil society and also the political society, which is the state, which is the working of the state. The intellectuals whose task is to secure the dominance or hegemony of their group in civil society, they create the literature, art, philosophy, etc., which will inspire the free consent of members of all social groups. Because as you can see, they create the literature, art, philosophy, means that they are the ones who are the traditional intellectuals, or those intellectuals who share the common language of high culture, so that people belonging to all religions, people belonging to all communities, to all classes, to all strata of the society look up to them and influenced by them. And that is the role of the great individual philosopher who is at the top of this pyramid, which you can see, the organization of the intellectual culture, the social group. and this is the person who is at the top of the organization. He creates ideas which inspire people from all social groups, and the people of all social group, they give consent, they agree to the dominance of one social group, which social group to which this intellectual or most intellectuals belong. And the intellectuals whose task is to secure the hegemony of their group in the political society or in the state, it creates mechanisms. They create mechanisms that will force or coerce the obedience of those members of any social group who have not freely consented to the social dominance of one social group, consented to the dominance of one social group. Thus, the intellectuals persuade the public in the civil area to accept to a certain social order. The public in the civil area to accept a particular social order. They coerce the public to the same end in the political area. These two main types of intellectual activity, persuasion and coercion, constitute two main divisions of the superstructure pertaining to the belonging to the structure of the dominant social group. These two functions, they constitute the two main divisions of the superstructure of the dominant social group, as is indicated by the division of the superstructural triangle, which you can see in the diagram. The civil society and the political society and the state. The civil society consists of the organic intellectual. So to sum up the key Gramscian concepts presented up till here, an intelligentsia is not a distinct social group, but a part of some other fundamental social group. It is created by the fusion of the organic intellectuals of that group and the traditional intellectuals who falsely perceive themselves as independent of social and economic realities. An intelligentsia successfully generated will perform a range of intellectual functions, ranging from routine ones of the organic intellectuals to the refined and advanced ones of the traditional intellectuals. The former, the first one that I said, that is the routine functions of the organic intellectuals, they are closely related to the economic activity characteristic of their group. The latter, that is the advanced functions of the traditional intellectuals, they are only indirectly, however, they two are in harmony with the interests specific to the form of economic production of their group by virtue of their absorption by organic intellectuals, because of the fact that they are absorbed by the organic intellectuals. In order to become dominant, Gramsci says, or Gramsci means, in order to become dominant, a social group requires the services of intellectuals to enforce its hegemony in two areas, that is the civil society and the state. And the whole of the intelligentsia, the entire group of intelligentsia of the dominant social group, creates the superstructure appropriate, that is required for that group, which in turn becomes the superstructure of the whole society. The two main divisions of that superstructure correspond to the two main tasks of the intelligentsia to enforce the authority of the dominant social group, first in the civil society and then in the political society, that is also the state. So now we come to our third problem. Any society is composed of a dominant social group, which you can see represented in this diagram by A. You can see the alphabet A represents the dominant social group. So any society, as I was saying, any society is composed of a dominant social group, which in the diagram is represented by the alphabet A. Any society is composed of a dominant social group and one or more subordinate, which Gramsci calls subaltern social groups, represented by the alphabets B and C in the diagram. One or more of these subaltern social groups has the potential to displace, to move, to shift out, to displace the existing dominant social group. So that is how a social revolution happens, right? A class overrules or overthrows another class. Class struggle. If history is a history of class struggle, then throughout history we have had one class being toppled by the other class. So one or more of these subaltern groups, they have the potential to displace the existing dominant social group and emerge as itself hegemonic. Within each social stratum, within each social strata, work is performed which is consistent with the economic activity of that group. Some of this work requires more of an expense of muscular and nervous energy. Some of this work requires more mental energy than muscular and nervous effort. There is no sharp distinction, there is no sharp difference between non-intellectual and intellectual labor. All laborers, in that they think at all, are intellectuals. All laborers, the fact that they think at all makes them intellectuals. And all intellectual activity, however refined it may be, is actually labor. Nonetheless, a continuous line of labor exists within each social stratum, ranging from that which is intensively muscular, nervous in type, at the extreme left of the diagram, which you can see, and it ranging from this kind of work to that which is intensively cerebral or mental in type, which is at the extreme right of the diagram. Those laborers whose work is primarily intellectual constitute the organic intellectuals of their social group. And while all members of all social groups are intellectuals, we can call them intellectuals in the fact that they think at all, few are philosophers. Yet even those who are not philosophers think about their society, of course, and how the society works, the cosmos of the society, that we say, the cosmos. The sum of their ideas, the entire sum of their ideas, is described as common sense. Common sense comprises a jumble of incoherent ideas, some derived from prejudice, some stemming or emerging from economic interests, some imposed by an alien but dominating social group, some inappropriate to the worker or thinker's real historical position, real contemporary position, but somehow surviving from a dead past, because of some reasons. And as far as these multiplicious ideas, varied ideas, are chaotic and contradictory, they are accepted, even so they are accepted on faith and are rarely subjected to critical analysis. We do not subject common sense to critical analysis. Thus, those members of a social group whose work is primarily muscular and nervous will be unlikely to examine. They are the non-critical thinkers, so they are the ones who will be unlikely to examine critically the common sense notions they share with their fellows. Even if they attempt to do so, they will be unable to create a coherent or an understandable world conception which is appropriate to their social group. This task will fall upon those relatively few members, relatively small in number, this task of creating the worldview will fall upon those who are relatively few in number of a social group, the organic intellectuals, who can attain the skill, who can acquire the skill and discipline which enables them to subject common sense to critical analysis, to reduce it to order, from chaos to order, to create philosophy. Only the organic intellectuals of each social group, it is only the organic intellectuals of each social stratum that are capable of generating a philosophy which is consistent, which is similar, or which is consistent, which is most appropriate to the needs of the social group which the organic intellectuals represent. That is the true function of the organic intellectuals. But if a social group is to become historically successful, that is if it is to stay on for a number of generations, dominant or hegemonic, it must be able to render, or it must be able to give or provide harmony, provide a peaceful, how should I put it, a peaceful cooperation with its critically evolved philosophy. But if a social group is to become historically successful, it must be able to provide it must be able to become harmonious or in coordination with its critically evolved philosophy, the common sense notions of most of its members. That is to create an ordered world conception. So if this social group is to survive historically, it cannot neglect the non-critical thinkers. It cannot neglect the muscular and nervous effort of the so-called non-intellectual, of the monotonous worker, of the routine workers. It cannot neglect the social group in order to survive through time, cannot neglect the non-critical thought of the workers. It has to be in harmony. It has to create a philosophy or a worldview which is in harmony with the worldviews of this section of the society as well, of all the members of the social group, by a process of integration, by a process of mixing, fusing, cooperation, coordination, by a process of total integration. Therefore, a successful social group harmonizes non-critical, common sense thought with its critical philosophy. The shared world conception thus formed is nothing else than the ideology of that social group, and is evidenced and is found in all of its products and styles of behavior and creation. So in a world today dominated by capitalist multinational corporations who understand the need, who understand that the society will buy products and creates products such as cosmetics, such as beauty products for all of the people. So now you will say, so it creates a product called Fair and Lovely. It creates a product which will so-called, make your skin fair, etc., etc. So by creating this product, it is not only catering to the, beauty product need of the, of the upper class of the society, of the upper classes of the society, but by catering to the need, to the desire of becoming fairer, it is also playing to the needs of the non-critical thinkers who do not question the authenticity of the usage of the product, because of the work that they are involved in, that is a routine, monotonous work of the worker laborer, of the so-called non-intellectual worker. He or she does not put too much energy into critically diffusing or critically deconstructing the usage or the propaganda that exists behind the product. So therefore, a social group, in order to exist through time, in order to survive the ravages of time, in order to exist in the philosophy of praxis, it must integrate itself with the it must create a philosophy which is in total integration with the non-critical thinkers as well as the critical thinkers. And the thought that is produced, the philosophy that is produced thereof, is nothing else than the ideology of that social group, which is evidenced, which is found in all of its products and styles of behavior and creation. And how is this integration achieved then? Since common sense notions are inherently chaotic, as I said, and they cannot serve as a foundation for a coherent or a concrete worldview, they cannot be the founding stone. Common sense is not the founding stone for philosophy. So the direction must obviously come from philosophy itself. The responsibility for the integration of thought, the creation of ideology, that is, within a given social stratum, falls therefore upon the intellectual. This is another role of the intellectual that we are seeing, that we are learning together. The intellectual is responsible for the creation of ideology. The intellectuals, they must persuade the other members of their social group to accept and participate in a body of thought that they have critically elaborated, that the intellectuals have critically elaborated. Thus, the intellectual's responsibilities are twofold. He has two functions if he is to raise his social group to prominence, to dominance. First, he must derive from his own critical thought, critical self-consciousness, that is, a coherent, a concrete philosophy which is appropriate to his group. And second, he must act in order to inspire or to compel, to force, to share, to force, to coerce the other members of his group to share in this conception. The first task is purely intellectual, something that he creates from his own self-consciousness, the idea, the ideology. The second is political. In Gramscian theory, in the theory of Gramsci, intellectuals do not only participate in the political process, they trigger and organize the political process. Through political action, a form of persuasion, political action is a form of persuasion that surpasses, that crosses the that is beyond mere verbal persuasion, mere rhetorical persuasion. Political persuasion is not just a political representative standing on the stage and giving lectures that inspire individuals. It is not just that. Political action is not just that. It is not just rhetorical persuasion, but the political action is the organic intellectuals of any social group, which the organic political action is that which the organic intellectuals of any social group can extend to all its members. The philosophy which has evolved to express the needs and interests of that group, that is political action. That is when the organic intellectuals take upon themselves the responsibility to extend to all the members of its social group the philosophy which best represents its desires and its interests. And together, knit together or bound together by a common world conception, it can become the dominant group. And having erected or having created a new and vital ideology, the organic intellectuals, once the social group is dominant, the organic intellectuals have now become the political leaders of their groups. They are able to subsume, or they are able to absorb within themselves, within their activity, the traditional intellectuals who eventually become their advocates. They become the mouthpiece, they become the speakers or representatives, or the elitist philosophical representatives or the cultural representatives of these organic intellectuals. And this diagram represents the three stages in the process of ideological integration. So what are the three stages of ideological integration? At the very lowest level, in this, which is written subaltern stratum, in the subaltern stratum, which is the alphabet C, we can see that no subgroup or no subaltern group has of organic intellectuals has succeeded in elaborating or in creating or dispersing a critical philosophy which is appropriate to its larger social group. All collective thought remains only commonsensical, as we can see at the very lower end of the diagram. In B, that is the very part above the subaltern strata, which is represented by the alphabet B, the subaltern social stratum, this is also the subaltern social stratum, with the potential to become hegemonic, organic intellectuals have generated such critical philosophy, but they have not yet acted politically. That is, they have not yet inspired or forced or coerced or persuaded the larger members of the group. So they have not become, they have not taken the political action. They have not yet acted politically to convert that philosophy into a common world conception in which all of the members of the group, social group, can participate. In the topmost level, that is the dominant social group, that is represented by the alphabet A, the organic intellectuals have generated an appropriate philosophy. They have taken political action to transform the philosophy of the elite into a collective ideology, and have secured cooperation of the traditional intellectuals who will express that world conception in universal language. So if I am to summarize, intellectuals do not exist only in the dominant social stratum, but also in the subaltern social strata. In all strata, they constitute not a distinct subgroup, but merely that segment of the laboring population whose work is more intensively mental than muscular nervous. The function of these organic intellectuals in each social stratum is to examine critically the common sense notions peculiar to their group, and to reduce them to a philosophy which will be accepted by all the members of the social group. And if their social group is to succeed historically, and attain dominance, these organic intellectuals have the further responsibility of acting politically. Then after they have accomplished the integration, they have ideological integration of their social group, the organic intellectuals are able to attach the energies of the traditional intellectuals upon whom is imposed that upon whom the ideology is imposed, and by whom it is more elegantly expressed. Thus far, the role of the intellectuals as far up till now, that is, the role of the intellectuals, organic and traditional, in securing the hegemony of a particular social group has been highlighted. So what now remains is to place this process within a broader historical and philosophical setting. Why was Gramsci writing about the philosophy of praxis right at that point of time during Italian Renaissance? So we have to understand that, because for the integrative and organizational functions of the intellectuals, they do not cause movement in history. They only permit movement to occur. That is, they trigger. They are pivotal, they are important, they are significant in triggering, but they are not they do not form the origin of the social change. Intellectual activity is the medium by which economic change is translated into political change. So now we will move on to the fourth and the final problem that we have had at hand. So that brings us to the fourth and the final problem that we have at hand. The historical process consists of the successive emergence and dominance of new fundamental social groups, as we have learned thus far. That is, of new social groups whose economic activity is of a type distinct from and potentially more successful, of course, more successful than the other social groups, than the previously dominant social group, because of which it was overthrown by the current dominant group. It's quite logical. Thus, history is moved by economic change. which causes new social groups to seek hegemony. Hegemony is sought, as we saw, in two areas already introduced. First, in civil society. Second, and only after the first, at first the civil society has been conquered. Secondly comes the hegemony in the political society. The whole process by which economic shift causes a new social group to seek and secure hegemony in civil and political society constitutes a historical block. What is this historical block? So then a historical block is a complete stage of the historical process. That is the entire process that we learned up till now. The entire process by which economic shift causes a new social group to desire and then secure hegemony in the civil and the political sphere. This entire process is known as the historical block. If a new fundamental social group emerges in history but fails to attain the ultimate condition of political hegemony, that is, fails to create a state ruled by a communist party, by a revolutionary party, its history is incomplete. It is not formed a historical block. It has utterly failed. Intellectual activity is the means by which an emergent social group becomes hegemonic, by which economic potential becomes political reality. The intelligentsia is thus the pivot of the historical process. It is the pivot of the historical block, represented in the diagram which you see in front of you, where the central zone of intellectual activity bridges or brings together the areas of economic and political activity. And intellectuals organize historical change. Intellectuals organize historical change by the process which we had already discussed when we were discussing our third problem in the last problem, and which we will review here in a different context. So how do the intellectuals help in achieving this historical block? Organic intellectuals first create, at the highest levels of culture, a coherent and understandable and critical philosophy, compatible, which is acceptable with the needs and interests of their social group. But if they stop at this point, history does not move. There must occur a combination. So there, as I was saying, is that there must occur a conversion, a transmutation, a conversion of intellectual into voluntary force, into force. Intellectuals must find within themselves the will, the desire to enact their philosophy, to convert their philosophy into action, into political action, which if not done will become non-historical, inconsequential, will have no results whatsoever. As actors of their own philosophy, intellectuals become the political organizers of their social group. In Gramsci's optimistic and modern terminology, they become the political party itself, or which he also calls the modern prince. He calls the modern prince the collective the collective representative of the analogy that was presented by Machiavelli in his book The Prince, in whose supremely in which book the supremely concentrated will of the Prince of Machiavelli was expressed by the never to be fulfilled urge, the urge that was never to be fulfilled, the urge of Renaissance Italy's ruling group to attain political hegemony. So for Gramsci, the intellectuals who do a similar thing in praxis, they become the modern prince. This activated intelligentsia of Gramsci, whether or not acting as a political party, this intelligentsia then persuades the other members of its social group to join in the world conception that they have created. The world conception, first expressed in traditional language as critical philosophy, now expressed in popular language and made the common ideology of that group. Having thus organized and achieved ideological integration within their social group, the organic intellectuals, reinforced by newly absorbed, they have been reinforced by the newly absorbed traditional intellectuals also. So having thus organized and achieved ideological integration within their social group, this intelligentsia, the organic intellectuals together with the traditional intellectuals, can proceed to secure the civil and political hegemony that will signal, that will call to the culmination of the historical process in the creation of a new historical bloc. And if the intellectuals fail to evolve a critical philosophy appropriate to their social group, if they fail to move from intellectual activity to political activity, if they fail to integrate the world conception of their group by replacing the chaos of the common sense of all of the subaltern groups, if they fail to attract and direct the services of the traditional intellectuals, they will not have created a culture cohesive and concretized within the economic function of their group, and they will be responsible for its failure to achieve hegemony. Their role is thus very, very crucial. They must produce the catharsis by which economics is transcended, economics moves beyond in culture, so that it may become political, by which structure is resolved in superstructure, so that it may generate structure by which practice becomes theory to become practice, by which quantity dissolves into quality to objectify as quantity. They are the moving force in the historical dialectic. In this process, the organic intellectuals with the newly absorbed traditional intellectuals, they turn their philosophy into action, and then that action becomes the ideology, and in turn again a philosophy of the dominant social group, which is accepted either by coercion or through ideology by all of the social groups. This is the most crucial function of the intellectuals. This necessarily, this schematic outline of Gramsci's theory of the social function of intellectuals has arrived, whatever we have learned up till now, we have arrived at the following point. And what point have we arrived at then? We have arrived at this point, after whatever we have learned so far, we can fairly say that though the ultimate historical realities remain economic and political, intellectuals perform a role of unparalleled importance as they bridge the gap between these realities. And it is only the failure of an intelligentsia to perform its responsibilities that can explain the failure of a social group to achieve social dominance, and can explain by extension the failures of a nation. Gramsci as a philosopher has established this framework. Gramsci as historian uses this conceptual framework to analyze his historical past. One of the moments of critical failure in Italian history, according to Gramsci, was the Italian Renaissance. Now, the immediate context to Italian Renaissance, I will be sending you materials which will be aiding you in understanding. However, as far as I can tell you your understanding, proper understanding of the concepts that he has elaborated in his essay, that is of utmost importance, that the definition of the ideas, the conceptual definition of the ideas, of the new words that you have learned in this essay, they remain the most important for you to understand. Understanding terms such as the subaltern, terms such as hegemony, how is that achieved, the function of the intellectuals, how the intellectuals are formed, the differences between the organic and the traditional intellectuals, what roles they have to play in their own social stratum, how do they achieve as I said, the political reality of the economical dream, so and so forth. So these are the things that you must understand. And of course, if you have any problem in any way possible, you are of course free to come up to me with any questions and with any queries that you might have. Thank you very much. We are done with this essay.